Do you remember the square hole meme? The first shape goes in the right place and everything's great. But what happens afterwards is very interesting because every other shape fits in the same square hole. The truth is that your favorite tool is a square hole, and you will find a way to make everything fit through it. Regardless which tool you love, you manage to use it everywhere, even in cases when other tools might be much better suited for the job. My name is Gerhard Lazu. I used to be big on Bash in 2016. A lot of things have changed since then. Currently, I'm the head of infrastructure at Dagger, which is a startup that believes CI/CD should be code and it should run anywhere, exactly the same. Ken, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today. And for those that don't know you, who is Ken?
Hi, I'm Ken Cochrane. I'm currently the head of engineering at Acuity. If you're not familiar with Acuity, we are the enterprise Argo company founded by some of the creators of the Argo project. Before Acuity, I worked at other startups, one of them most notably at Docker, where I was the person who created what's now known as Docker Hub. So yeah, that's me.
Cool. That's a great intro, Ken. Pleasure to have you here. So the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to use Dagger to create an EKS cluster. This is KubeCon after all, and we need some Kubernetes, not Kubernetes, Kubernetes. And while this cluster is provisioning, let's move on and do something else. So we have 5 VNC consoles here, and these are for 5 separate hosts. Each of them has 4 AMD EPYC cores, 16 gigs of DDR4, and 250 gigs of NVMe storage. They're booted in a freshly installed Talos 166. There's no Kubernetes, it's just like the base operating system. What is special about these VMs is their location. So I asked ChatGPT to generate a map of Europe and highlight the 5 locations where these VMs are: London, Paris, Amsterdam, Düsseldorf, and Warsaw. It doesn't look right, does it? So let's try again. This is the second attempt. Lamb Slam, I'm not sure what that thing is, but I don't know a country called like that. Warsaw is definitely not Spain, and London is not France, for sure. I do love London's proximity to Switzerland, but yeah, it's not where it needs to be. So I took matters into my own hands, and I overlaid the 5 locations where these hosts are. There's London, Paris, Amsterdam, Düsseldorf, and Warsaw. And this is what it looks like. Cool. So what we're doing here, we are using Omni CTL to create a cluster out of these 5 nodes, and we're going to make a Kubernetes cluster. The interesting thing is that we have a single control plane, and that control plane runs in Paris, home of the KubeCon EU 2024. That's why Paris. And we have 4 worker nodes. And if we switch to the VNCs, we can start seeing how they're getting provisioned in real time. So there's Amsterdam 24 left-hand side, Düsseldorf right-hand side, and at the bottom, the Paris 24, which is the control plane VM. And we can see the states, some of them are booting, Paris is already running, the kubelet state is healthy, and within a few minutes, these nodes will finish provisioning. We see the 5 nodes. We see Kubernetes 129.2. It took 3 minutes and a bit to get all these nodes spun up. Why Kubernetes, Ken? Why do we love Kubernetes?
I think it's the standards, the ability to have all these APIs that just make it so much easier to standardize on. Before, even before Docker, everyone would deploy their applications in all these different ways. And then with Docker, they brought in the containers, which was great, which made it standardize the deployments. But then you need everything else. Like, how do you standardize the hosts, the networking, and all the other, stuff associated with that? And so Kubernetes kind of completes the picture there by creating all these standards that everyone can conform to.
Yeah. So the first thing which we're going to do with this European Kubernetes cluster is we are going to provision Argo CD. And Argo CD is going to handle everything else, but that is step number 1. So same as we try to answer why Kubernetes, why Argo?
Yeah, Argo, well, the reason why I like it is specifically around the ability to automate a lot of the stuff that people used to have to do by hand. So with Kubernetes, you have a lot of manifest files, a lot of YAML, and there's a lot of chance of accidentally, missing something or putting the wrong typo, human an element into it. So by putting all those in a Git repository and then using GitOps to sync into Kubernetes, it allows you to automate those steps, remove the human element. And also, it has a great UI. So if you don't know anything about Kubernetes, Argo has this great UI that allows you to look at all the different components and see what they're doing without having to know or become certified on Kubernetes. So I think it just automates everything and makes it a lot easier for you and the people who are maybe not as familiar to be able to see what's going on.
So as we're talking about that, Argo finished installing, and we can see the application controller and the server, the last two components to be finished. And in total, that took another minute. So that takes us to about 5 minutes so far. We set up Kubernetes on the cluster. We set up Argo. What about EKS? How is that coming along? Still going. So 5 minutes later, it's still provisioning. It's getting there. So we will come back to it later. Okay. This is when we tell Argo about all the other things that we wanted to apply, all the applications, and we have two apps of apps. We have core and we have apps. So we've applied that, we've given it the secret where the Git repository is to pull down all the things, and we can see what is the state of the various applications that now Argo is managing. So what do we see here? Well, we see Ingress Nginx, we see external DNS. These are some of the core components. There's Cert Manager, there's Cloud Native PG. There's a couple of components that we expect to be there. Prometheus Stack, another one, which will give us like a very nice baseline for this cluster. And all these building blocks we will be using to assemble and to make something with this cluster. So as we're talking, you can see that almost everything has been provisioned. And by the way, this was in real time. Cool. So to get another view, now we have an ingress for Argo. So we can see Argo from a different perspective. And we're trying to log in. So let's see, we're trying to get there. Yeah, that's the right one. The certificate isn't in place yet. So even though the ingress is already provisioned, the DNS, by the way, is provisioned, we have external DNS, the certificate hasn't been provisioned yet. Give it another minute or two. The certificate is provisioned. We refresh, boom, we're there. Okay, we have to get a secret, obviously, to log in into Argo, the initial admin secret. This is the same view for the applications. It's the same applications that we've seen before in K9s, but this is Argo's view. And this is the UI that Ken was telling us about. So as we installed Argo, there are like a few things which I had to navigate. So the first one is this empty diffs. Maybe you have seen them before. So in this case, there's one application which apparently hasn't finished syncing. It's the local path provisioner. It seems to be out of sync. And there's no diff. Right? That's why I'm calling like the empty diff. Everything has been applied correctly. So the workaround, which I'm using, again, Ken will tell me if this is the right approach or there's something better, is to basically delete it in a non-cascading way and then force a resync. And when it will be reapplied, everything will be fine. So it will no longer show up as out of sync. Have you seen this before, Ken? Do you know what is happening in the background?
Yeah, I unfortunately don't know what's happening in the background, and I was going to reach out to someone and I forgot, so I apologize.
That's okay. Okay. That will be next time for sure. Cool. So, I mean, again, if others have hit this or if you know how to fix this or what's happening, drop a comment below. That's okay. Moving on. So everything's fine with the local path provisioner. The other things that you may see, and this is again something which I've hit in this context, is an infinite sync loop. What does that look like? In this case, there's cargo, which is being applied. And as you can see, there seems to be a diff, but the diff is empty values. And then what Argo CD will try to do is we'll try to sync it over and over again, even though in actual fact, there's no diff. So the workaround, again, which I came up with, and it seems to kind of work, is just disable autosync. It's not great, but it seems to stop that automatic syncing loop. Any thoughts on this, Ken?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that one either. I think, cargo, if it's specific to cargo, it's still very early days. It's, 0.43. So it's possible it's something related to that, or just a misconfiguration.
Got it. Okay, cool. Well, we can follow up on that as well. So to move on, this is when we do the live demo. Let's drive this from within Argo as well. So we have applications, and if we click on it, it's basically in apps, and there's a single app, which is Daggerverse. This one doesn't exist, so it has not been created. So we're going to sync the app, synchronize, syncing, and now this application will start syncing. So what we see here is the web deployment, and the Postgres one. I think that's the interesting one. Postgres is being created, Daggerverse Postgres, the cluster. There you go. So now we're seeing a restore from backup. So the cluster, the Postgres cluster using Cloud Native PG is being created. It's restoring from backup from object storage. And that's why the application is failing, because there's no Postgres to connect to. If you look from another perspective, we go into this one, we can see the full stack, this recovery, how it's like going through the recovery process. And it should be finished very, very soon. And when it will be finished, these should start running. So these are failing to connect. So that's what's happening. These are failing to connect. This is completed now. Great. So now we can start seeing other pods. So let me maybe switch to a different view, which is a bit easier to understand. Okay, so we've restored the Postgres database. The primary is being spun up. And there you go. A replica is being spun up. So that will join it. And now these applications, obviously they have a backoff, but they should start being able to connect to Postgres whenever they try to reattempt. So the application is coming together. The Postgres is slowly forming. And in terms of the distribution, we can see the nodes where this runs on. One on each worker node. So Warsaw, London, Düsseldorf, and Amsterdam. As for the database, we can see that the primary spun up on Warsaw 24. This one will be Postgres 2, so this will be replica in Düsseldorf, and we have another one in Amsterdam. You'll see that we have here a tailnet. So when these nodes were provisioned, they were provisioned with Tailscale as well. So they joined the Tailscale network. My host, the one that I'm currently on, is part of the same Tailscale network, which means I can securely connect to any of these. So there's a tab. I'm going to refresh this. There you go. So now I connected to the newly created database, to the newly created app, and I'm using the London 24 node specifically. I could change it, for example, to the US to go to Düsseldorf specifically. This is just the entry point. Then it will be randomly distributed to one of the nodes inside, one of the web pods. So Ken, when he saw this, he was saying, hey, we're looking at this, but how do we know which location it's serving? So can you expand a little bit on your thought, Ken? Because again, that was your idea. So do you remember what you were saying?
Yeah. So I've seen a lot of these demos, but sometimes just because you see the URL doesn't necessarily mean that's the location. So it's hard to see the URL. So in past, it's nice to show like an image, like either a flag or something to show where they are, so that when you're reloading the page, you can see that it is actually changing from the different locations.
Yeah, that's right. Cool. So that's something which I didn't have time to do for today. Pretend that what's happening, I'm doing a git commit and the pipeline is going to take this through. But in the meantime, force push, this is main. So I'm going to force push, and then we come back here. We go into the Daggerverse. We say refresh. Cool, out of sync. And now it will start rolling the pods. We can see a new one's being created, and it will go through all the others and do that. So when this is finished, and maybe we don't have to wait that long because we can start hitting this app and see if it changes. Do you see something different?
Yeah, it's a little flag on top of Dagger.
There's tiny. So let's just zoom in, see if we can see. There you go. There it is. So this was served from the Netherlands. So let's refresh again. There you go. That was Poland. So this was serving from Warsaw, that Warsaw node. This is London. And we have one more. Germany, there you go. Okay, so now we've got all 4 locations served. Cool. So, by the way, as we were preparing this talk, this was not public at that point in time. Now, a few days ago, this went live, the Daggerverse, and it's live on daggerverse.dev. And you can see the only difference really between these two are maybe the order of the modules, right? There's like a few others, but also like the flag. That's the only difference. Otherwise, it's exactly the same app. Cool. How is our EKS cluster doing? It's still creating. 23 minutes there. That's how long it took for the EKS cluster to create. So now we can start all over again. Lay down Argo, put all the things. So we are back to the beginning and we already know what it looks like. However, Ken made a good point. As we were preparing this, he was saying, what about cost? I'm wondering. Many people are wondering, maybe you're wondering too, how much does the EKS cluster cost versus your European cluster? So let's talk about that. Let's look at EKS first. So EKS, if we provision it in EU Central 2, and the reason for that is because that was the only location I could find which has the exact same spec for the hosts for the EC2 instance as we were using in our cluster. That is the M6 IDX large. The cost of these nodes on EKS in EU Central 2 would be 916 for on-demand M6 IDX large. These are for the worker plane, the 4 nodes. If we're provisioning spot instances, they may be a little bit cheaper. This is the average cost. Where AWS gets you really is the network cost, especially egress. That tends to be very, very expensive. As we know, the cheap part is the compute cost. The expensive part is the network cost. As for our other cluster, we're paying 10 euros for the Omni control plane. As for the nodes, the one node is 29 euros. So like one of those VMs from the provider which we chose is 29 euros. The worker plane is 116, and the network is free. You get 1 gigabit, unlimited, fair usage, but still unlimited, and like a real 1 gigabit network. What are your thoughts, Ken, when you look at it this way?
Yeah, it's amazing how much cheaper it is. And I don't think a lot of people will realize that. They just assume the cloud is cheaper because it was, cheaper than what they had with on-prem. But I think things are changing. There's another cost that's actually going to start coming on EKS starting April, where if you're using an older version of Kubernetes, you're going to have to pay some extended support, which is going to increase the cost of your control plane. I think it goes from like 10 cents an hour or something like that to 60 cents an hour. So something, yeah. Wow. So it's going to be a lot more. I forget the exact numbers, but they announced it a little while ago, so we could probably do the research. So the advantage of this is you can run your own Kubernetes version, even if it's older, and not have to pay any extra. So I think that's the convenience and that you can do, what you want. And then the egress, like you said, is ridiculous. The fact that it's free versus could be thousands, could be tens of thousands a month.
Yeah, exactly. That's where AWS gets you, really, the egress fees. Everyone in the industry knows that, but until you get the bill, you just don't realize how much it is. It's difficult to see it. I would say the cost difference is about 10x. Easy, you're like looking at a 10x difference. And the tooling has improved so much in recent years that maybe you don't need a managed Kubernetes. Maybe it's possible. And again, we will continue researching this area, like showing a few options, like how do you upgrade, how do you secure. But overall, I think the tooling has improved massively in the last 2 to 3 years. Okay. So this is what it looks like when we sort all the tools that we picked carefully and thoughtfully. And this is like most of the stuff that we use in our cluster. So the right tool for the right job in the right place. Now you may be thinking, hey, there's a round logo. You're putting it like in a triangular hole. Well, there's too many tools which have a round logo. So, this is realistic. As you're looking at this, there's still one thing missing. So there's something missing in that square hole. So for those watching this and listening to this, what do you think, if there was a thing for us to fit in the square hole, what do you think would go in the square hole?
Yeah, no, it makes sense because everything is running inside of Kubernetes. So it's the thing that connects everything together.
When all is said and done, you put all the tools together, right? You have Kubernetes. It's a tool for building platforms, for building things on top. With that in mind, would it need to be the square hole? Not necessarily. I mean, some of you are using a PaaS, and that's fine. But think about the tooling that you need to use with that PaaS, and how does that tooling make it onto it? And what options do you have? Is it maybe too inflexible? Either way, when you use the right tool for the right job, it feels great. whether it's Argo, whether it's Cargo, whether it's something else, just pick the right tool. Don't choose one and just go for everything. And with that in mind, even Kubernetes, there's cases when it doesn't make sense. And I would like to call that out. Any other thoughts, Ken?
Yeah, no, I think it should be eye-opening to a lot of people who for a long time were told, move to the cloud, do managed everything, that now that the tooling and everything has progressed over the years, that there's more flexibility. You don't have to, everyone, you kind of look at everyone has either been in the cloud, and the only one that's not in the cloud right now are some of these bigger businesses that take a little while. And those same businesses might still be doing COBOL and other little things.
Yeah.
But now the people that have been in the cloud for years some people are saying, hey, the cloud doesn't work for me because of the cost, and they're going to move out of the cloud. And that's not uncommon. I mean, you get to a certain size and you're going to, the cloud is probably made for the 80%. And then you have those remaining 20% of the people where it might not fit. And if you have the skills and the capability to go outside and run it yourself, you could save a lot of money, especially for startups, because that's at least at our company, a huge chunk of our bill every month goes to Amazon. And nothing against them, but when you're, it's getting hard to find money these days when companies are trying to fundraise. Anything you can do to save money is going to be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, spot on. Now, the thing which I want to mention, first of all, I wanted to do like a special thanks to Matias. He's my partner in crime on the infra team at Dagger. And we do some great things together, including like setting up EKS using Dagger. The screen share that you've seen, it was mostly him really putting all that together. So thank you, Matias. And to be honest, all of our stuff runs on AWS. So at Dagger, all the infra is AWS. And if you look closely enough, you can see there is an EKS logo in this image. So AWS does still all the heavy lifting for us. And there's various reasons, security concerns, especially SOC 2. When you think from that perspective, there's like something to be said there. But will this be true in a few years? I don't know. But with that in mind, this is a wrap. We are done. How do you feel, Ken? I'm still recording, but we don't have to include this in the final one unless it's good. Unless we say something good and funny. Otherwise, no.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. Thank you for having me. I haven't done one of these before, so it's always nice to see how the sausage is made.
Putting it all together. Okay. In terms of a follow-up, would you like to do a follow-up with this talk?
I think so. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what people think of it and then to get the comments and the feedback. But I have a feeling, like you said, this is probably going to be part one of a few different parts to kind of go from there, because the piece that I was surprised about was the stuff that you showed me of with like all the I forget the name of the website it was, but you sent over the link where you can get all these really cheap servers for, and it's like cloud in the sense that you can make an API, hit a trigger and get a server. And a lot of people probably aren't aware of that. And so going into the next step of like, great, you saw this part, but now how did we do it? How did we get the 5 servers? Like anyone can just go to Amazon, Google, and Microsoft and say, hey, go to this region and spin up a server. But there's other alternatives to that where you can save money and also diversify. The whole thing around, European data privacy and the GDPR and all that stuff, I think will, especially with the folks in Europe, will be like, hey, my data can't leave my country or my continent.
Yeah.
I think that will be very helpful for a lot of folks who are either just starting out or are already in the cloud, but they're afraid of moving off because of, like you said, the SOC 2 concerns or whatever other compliance concerns they might have.
Thank you for joining our KubeCon EU 2024 proposed talk that didn't make it through the CFP stage. We gave it exclusively online and had great fun doing it. Also, we just got back from KubeCon in Paris and will be publishing various interviews and videos over the coming weeks. See you soon.